Tim here, and welcome to this edited recording of a live demo to my Patreon members as one of our monthly painting projects. Each month we paint a different subject in watercolour, street scenes, landscapes, seascapes, and some quite challenging subjects as well. In this demo, I'm going to be painting Sedona in Arizona and a very complex rural scene of these mountain ranges, these buttes, and trying to get a sense of depth into the painting. So please join me as I've just welcomed my attendees and I dive into the scene and materials. So it's a complete painting process, this. Please stick around. And if you want more information about Patreon and getting involved in very active watercolor community, then please check out my site, which is patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. We discussed this at length on the Pat Chat the other day. So scene is Sedona, Arizona, and I think over on the right there is the Cathedral Rock. So these are, just to get the right geological term, these are buttes where you've got the more denser cap to these structures, and then the softer rock gets eroded away, and as it gets eroded away, it forms like a little sort of scree or slope there of rubble. Then we've got some harder rock, I guess, there. So you've got these tiers, very attractive mountains here, very iconic. And how can we paint? How can we portray the scale of this scene and those reds as well? So thanks very much to fellow member Liz for the kind sharing of her photo. As you may know, all our Patreon projects are chosen from your photos. And we did a vote, didn't we, a few weeks ago on which different landscapes you wanted to paint for July. And this was the clear winner for July. Yeah, so how can we get the scale? How can those reds? I'm not sure the photo does it justice, but those lovely reds in there, gorgeous. You know, we're really going to have a little bit of fun with mixing reds, different shades of red in there. From a watercolor point of view, from a painting point of view, we've got lots of depth in the scene. So in the distance, there's that plateau, which I think is another mesa, maybe in the distance there, and mountains beyond. And then from these buttes, I guess that butte there is obviously less eroded, that background butte, less eroded than this one over here. Slightly different formation over on the left. But in between, we've got these lovely sort of U-shaped valleys between the two. Sense of depth then, and this sort of sequence of objects from the foreground. The foreground here, partly in the shade, I reckon, with this very rich red soil, and very dry and arid, and the different pine trees growing here, native vegetation, then going into the valley beyond, and then up to the main butte. I'm not sure if this is Cathedral Rock or the right-hand one is, but they're both equally striking. So we've got the main structure here, then over to the right, that one with the sort of pinnacle, that sort of these two pinnacles there, in between two larger rock formations, and then I guess halfway between, distance-wise from us, halfway between this one and that one, we've got this larger rock there. Obviously with depth, lighter value, cooler as well. Yeah, and a nice scene to be had. So we're going to have a lot of fun painting this, I think. I was discussing also on Pat Chat how I might change this scene. And I was, well, two main things. First of all, moving the horizon up a little bit. All right, we've got a lot of sky here. I think we could do the landscape a little bit more justice by moving up that horizon just a little bit. Maybe maybe just slightly above that halfway line. And also balancing there's a lot of objects on the right. 1, 2, 3. Balancing something on the left with another object there. At first I mentioned putting a couple of hikers, but that wouldn't give us an idea of the scale of the scene, that the figures would be lost here. If you think about what size the figures might be, well, we can see the size of trees here, the size of those houses, they'd just be lost in there. So no, not I'm not going to have any hikers or ramblers in the scene. Next step, maybe a tree in there. Yeah, that's a possibility. For example, on the right-hand side here, I zoom back out. On the right-hand side there, we can just about see a tree. So we can see the sort of scale of them, and they're kind of that height. So maybe a tree there would be a possibility. The other day, a couple of days ago, I did a practice sketch of another Sedona scene. And it made me rethink this composition. And Mike made a good point, to crop or not to crop. So I've made an executive decision to a little bit of a deviation from what I concluded on the Pat chat. I'm going to zoom in now. All right, zoom in, and imagine we're doing something like this. Maybe not the dimensions, maybe not as wide as this, but if you imagine sort of 4 by 3. So zooming in, the main rock bigger. We can see more of the as I'm zooming in, I can see more of the detail. All of these horizontal bands, lights and darks. The values of the dark valley over there, the darks of the left-hand side there, the darks of the scree slope there, that light patch in the valley, some foreground trees. But I think there, I'm going to, and we've got less of the sky. We're still gonna have a bit of a fun time painting that sky, but it's not as if you zoom back out, there's a lot of sky there. I think this is going to be more about the landscape. So I'm zooming in, all right, and focusing on that. That could be my focal point. And look at the light hitting that right-hand side there, almost a 45-degree angle up to the peak of the cap of that butte. Nice light here, this other sort of pinnacle on the side, and then another one there. Quite light on the scree slopes there, light there, and then that light across the valley floor. A light, maybe a pitch roof catching some light there as well in the valley. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. When you look at this, when you do your own, think about the lights and darks. Where's the lightest area? Where's the darkest area? Think about your composition. Nothing stopping you doing what we, actually following the image here. If you want to go along with this and catch the, put in those left-hand mountains, no problem at all. I did say with the dimensions of my paper, I'd have to condense the scene, squash it all in a little bit more, because I'm not widescreen, I'm not 16 by 9 format, I'm all 4 by 3. So I need to condense things a little bit. Anyway, that's our source photo. Have a look at that before you start, or as we go through. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go back to me. There we go. Hopefully you can see my paper. A little bit more detail there. Okay, I think it's coming through. Yes, so just to recap, this is the one I did a couple of days ago as a practice for this. And if you've seen the video that I posted of my painting process, I concluded that I might have gone a bit too dark with the mountains there, and there's a lot of darkness here. So let's try and get in a little bit, compared to with this one, let's get in a little bit more light. I might have gone a bit too red as well. When you look at the source photo, this one on Pixabay, it's a lighter color at the top. It's orange. It's more orange rather than red. And the actual sort of scree slopes there are a little bit darker. So anyway, that was my practice of this scene. Fairly happy with the way that the foreground trees came out. I'll be doing something similar on this one. As regards a little plant, as I sometimes do, I wouldn't do this if I was painting on my own, but I'm doing this for other people's benefit, and you might think this is useful. This is my thoughts on the composition. All right, so I'm, like Mike says, I'm cropping it, I'm zooming in a bit more and making more of a feature of the main butte, the light hitting that top right corner. The sky, as you can see, the sky here, not a big part of the composition, but I'll still add in those clouds and a bit of the sky. Maybe if I'm going quite warm on the colors here of the rocks, maybe I would go in with blues or a greeny blue, possibly up in the sky there. Try and get in the distant mountain on the left-hand side and push that back. Softer edges, lighter in value, cooler reds, dark over on the right-hand side with those couple of pinnacles there between the two structures. And then these layers, rather like a sort of cake or wedding cake or whatever, coming down from that main butte. And then we've got the scree slopes there. Then another vertical, then another little scree slope, then another vertical, and it sort of hits the valley floor then, and we've got all the vegetation and that light area here. Foreground, there's that reddish soil, almost a bit of a higher area here where the photo was taken from, I guess, Liz. There is a sort of highway down here. Going to ignore that. You'll see in the source photo, you'll see some power lines, ignoring that. Keep the foreground fairly simple, really, with that reddish soil and these very dark, quite rich green pine trees, sort of silhouetted, hopefully against a lighter middle ground. So that is the plan for me, but nothing stopping you rearranging the scene. Or maybe when you do a little bit of research on Google, you might find this scene from a different angle. Have a go, all right? And for those of you on the relevant Patreon level or tier, you get to send me a photo of your painting, and in return I send you a video critique, my sort of feedback on how the painting went. So hopefully you find that useful for those of you on that Patreon tier or level. Right, materials. So Saunders Waterford, cold press paper, 300 grams, 15 inches by 11 inches. Paints, these are paints I use are from Mark Jackman in the UK, Jackman's Art Materials. These are handmade, professional grade watercolor paints. I've got neutral tint, so it's the same palette, and I will try and describe them as I go through the painting process. Neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red or English oxide, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, and then I have lavender, quinacridone gold, a Naples lemon yellow gouache, and a white gouache. There's lots of reds in this subject, and I'm going to be using a combination of, well, the warmest reds, like my cadmium orange and cadmium red, alizarin crimson, the light red, the possibly yellow ochre as well. I mean, that cap, the cap of the main mountain is quite, it's like a sort of yellowy red. almost like an opaque yellowish color. And that could be my Naples lemon yellow, or if you don't have that, a combination of white and a sort of the sort of opaqueness of a white with the yellow ochre. That would give you that top, and also some of those lighter horizontal bands going across the lower rocks, the lower levels as well. Yeah, it's going to have lots of fun with the red. Brushes wise, normal brushes, I think mainly these three. A mop brush, this is a Tintoretto mop brush with a good point, holds a lot of paint, water, and then a smaller detail brush, synthetic brush, again with a good point, and a 1/2 inch flat brush as well. All right. Okay, so well, that's my thoughts on the composition. Let's get started then with the initial drawing and a pencil outline. Let me just check and see if there's any questions. I don't think there is. Okay. Sand is steaming hot, humid, ugly. Well, here in the UK right now, if anyone's on here live listening to the UK, it's well, it's just gone 8 p.m. It's 20 past 8, and it's pouring down with rain here, and it's quite chilly as well for early July. Anyway, right. Let me do the initial drawing then with an HB pencil. This is a 0.9mm lead. Mechanical pencil, and the main thing is to get the position of the main focal point, that main butte, right in the image, the right size and the right position in the frame as well. So starting with the peak of that butte with its cap. Just make sure, just hang on a second. I think you just begin to see this. I'll make these lines darker if you can't see them too well. Right, let's get this right in the composition as regards the size and the placement as well. So there is my peak. Right hand side, 45-degree slope, then almost vertical. They are vertical, aren't they? Not a straight line, squiggly line, down to the scree, and then about a third over to the left-hand side, there's almost like another sort of pinnacle attached to the main rock formation. Bit of light there, darkness here. So there's like these two pinnacles strapped to that butte, connected to it. Maybe the one on the right is a bit wider, a bit larger, and then the scree slopes go up in like a V up to the butte. It's really dark in there, really dark here. So I can indicate that with a little bit of cross shading. The light is coming from almost a 45-degree angle. So the sun's up there, top right corner. Let me just lightly get in the scree slope. Now, on the left-hand side of the butte, there's a shallower angle, and then it's steeper on the right. And it sort of comes down to the valley floor there. On the right, it comes down there. This scree ends about there before we get another vertical. And then, so roughly, that's the bottom of that next vertical. A little bit of a scree slope then below that, just a little bit, nothing like that one. So that's the biggest one. And then this is the next one down, and then it sort of goes down to the valley floor there. Going back to below the scree slope, there are these contours of curved structures, I guess where it's harder rock and the rock is eroded between the two. So there's, how many are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's about 14 or 15 of these, almost like smaller versions of that I guess it's harder rock that's resisted the erosion. And then we've got to think about the contour of these sides as well. And below that, it's actually a little bit simpler below that. There's a lighter bit there. So there's like a little tiny ridge going down there. It's quite light. Another one there. I guess there would be one there. That'd be quite light. The valley floor itself, as I say, is quite light. So light in there. And then between that light area and the foreground, looks like there's some woods, forest, denser grouping of trees. But let's keep things simple. Let's imagine that the light area transfers into this foreground straight away. So I have here, so these trees, there's one tree there, another tree there. There's a house about here with the rooftop actually quite bright. It stands out quite a lot. Quite a low pitch roof, so that's going to be light in there. So these are darker trees. And then over on the right-hand side, there's trees as well in that bottom right corner. This here, dark red soil. Over to the right-hand side and contrasting against the light top of that cap and the light side of the butte, we've got this other rock formation with these 2 or 3 pinnacles in the middle. Actually, they're not as big as that. Just imagine that, not as big as that. So it's going to be about that sort of height, and then a little bit of a gap, and then over to the right-hand side, another mountain formation, and then the sort of scree from that coming down. Bit of light there, but very dark in there. So dark, light, dark on the left-hand side of the butte. Now, going further into the distance, we've got that other mountain formation, and that is lower than this butte. In fact, the top of this is about halfway down the butte, so it's about here. Again, vertical sides, and then the sort of curved top to the scree, gently sloping down to the valley floor, over to the left-hand side, and in the distance, another plateau, mountains. Got to push that back. So background coming towards us with the left-hand mountain, main butte. There's a bit of dark shadow in there. Maybe it's being created by a cloud above, but that's quite nice. What I'm trying to get is light, dark through the image, which should turn out a little bit better than that, which was just sort of light, dark, light. I think I could have made that a bit more interesting. Yeah, I think that is it from an initial outline sketch point of view. Hopefully you can see that all right. Let me just see if there's any questions, those of you on here live. No. Is anyone painting along with me? Is anyone doing a sketch along with me? Pop that into chat if you are. Right, let me continue then with the painting. So first phase is to get that sky in, and it's a fairly light sky. I want to try and get in the formation of clouds, these fair weather clouds. They're high altitude, it's good weather, get in a bit of sky as well. So a bit of a mixture of sky and clouds. And then I will, after that, then I will come down and put in the base color of the reds, the lighter reds, okay? And down to the foreground, then we'll get in the darker red of the foreground, by which time the top will be starting to dry. So I can then get in the background there. I'll start working coming towards me, background here, and then this should be fairly dry. I can then start getting in the shadows of the butte and the mountain on the right, and that will really start to hopefully bring it all together. Right, brush then to start with, a Tintoretto size 6 brush, and the sky, I will pre-wet the sky first of all and get in those clouds, the cloud formation, and then the sky. So I'm going to pre-wet the sky first of all with clear water and my mop brush. Of course, I could do this with a sponge. Could do this with a sponge, but let's just get in a bit of dampness in there. Follow the contour of the shapes. There we go. Right. So some clouds. I'm just picking up some paint from a previous painting on my palette, some dirty color there. Those clouds, they're quite warm. Maybe a little bit of cadmium red, a little bit of yellow ochre, and just get in the base color for the darkness of those clouds. Cadmium red, yellow ochre. I keep that fairly light there because that will give me the actual value, the difference of value between that lighter area and the cloud is minuscule. Now just let that soak in a bit and get in the darker underbelly of some of these clouds. I could continue to use this brush, or I'll use a little flat brush here just to pick up some darker color, thicker in consistency, and a good cloud color for me is ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt umber. That's normally quite a good combination, kind of warm blue with that burnt umber. So the sky is still fairly damp, and then these clouds, they have fairly flat bottoms, and they've got a fairly hard edge of the bottom, fairly hard edge, and then a softer edge as we come up. I'll just move my microphone, and then soft, a soft top to them. Burnt umber, ultramarine blue. Let's just try and soften up the top edge of those clouds. So I'm still using that 1/2-inch flat brush, but I've washed out the brush and I've got fairly clear water. Just try and soften those edges a bit. Try and remove these brush marks of the flat brush. Now get in the sky, which is going to be a green blue. I think a little bit of this cobalt green, a little bit of bridging green and a cobalt blue. Make sure it's well and truly mixed. And then hopefully I should get a softer edge as well. As we go down to the horizon, I've got to get lighter with that blue and just soften up the edges a bit. If I get in a bit of blue in there as well. Of course, you could go a bit stronger with the sky over to the left-hand side. A little bit of the sky going through. Use my fingers to soften up the edges and move the paint around. Let's just try and get in the flat bottoms of these clouds a little bit more. This one here. But don't work at it too much, otherwise you see what's happening here is that the mixture of my paint is not quite right and perhaps a little bit too watery. So I'm getting some weird effects. Doesn't matter, just use my fingers and just keep the paint moving around. Let's just go up to the top edge of the paper up there. There we are. Let's just soften up that edge there. So I reckon on the left-hand side of a cloud, we're going to get that softer edge because the light coming from that right-hand side. Right, rocks. Well, let's get in the background first of all. Rocks coming forwards, but starting with that background, the furthest plateau and mountains. A little bit of cobalt blue, burnt sienna. And the distant mountain range. So this is wetting where I'm getting a very soft edge. Right, this plateau here looks like it's a valley floor between this mountain and the furthest mountains. Right, I'm now going to start getting a little bit warmer. So a little bit of my light red. But still quite light, as in the value in there. That's a bit of red, light red. And a little bit of light hitting the top of that plateau. Just have a little bit of a dip there for the valley and a fairly horizontal top to that plateau. All right, so we're gradually coming towards us now. The background, this background mountain here. Get a light color. Cadmium red, bit of light orange. Sorry, cadmium orange. And let's see what that's going to be like. So this is just the lightest color of this mountain. Let's cover the whole paper, apart from that white. Roof. So this is that distant valley floor. There's going to be a lot of greenery here, but in the greenery there are little gaps, little sort of open areas of areas where I guess the forest has been cleared or there's no trees. Now, let's do this right-hand one. Just the base color of this is, I'm going to go over a lot of this with darker. The darker value, there's the pinnacle, left and right. So I can still see my pencil line. There we go. Now the cap here of the main mountain is quite light. It's almost white. To me, it almost looks like, well, not snow, but it's getting that way. So I might use a little bit of this gouache here. If you haven't got this, then go with yellow ochre and a bit of white, maybe a sort of equal mixture. But I think that might just give me that color, that right kind of value for that, I guess, that harder material up there. Now, as I come down, it goes warmer. So let's transfer to my cadmium orange, cadmium red. perhaps a little bit of alizarin crimson in there to go more of that pinker or that blue shade. I've got more of a gap there than in the source photo, but I think that's all right. As long as with your eye, as long as you know that plateau there is lower than that gap there. Okay, down to just the base color for the scree slopes, the verticals, and then the valley floor. And this goes a little bit lighter again. It's almost like the top there. Go in there as well. That's the other mountain. Now, as I come down, it goes. Let's alter these shades of red. A little bit of burnt sienna, maybe. A bit of burnt sienna, alizarin crimson. And then over these trees, these foreground trees, watch out for the pitch roof. Then we've got the valley floor. Pick up my light gouache, my lemon yellow. So I'm just going back up into the mountain area here. Just keep dabbing away just to try and get in with my brush here. Just try and get in some subtle variations. You could try a little bit of splattering actually. I'm just dropping a little bit of extra color in there to give a bit of texture to it, and I might actually just lift off with my synthetic brush here. Just lift off a few little areas where the light is particularly hitting it, especially that top right corner. All right, let's continue down to the bottom of the paper and the foreground. That's where it really goes quite a darker red, a darker sort of browny red. So cadmium red, light red, Perhaps a bit of burnt sienna. Cadmium red. Yeah, combination of those three for me. You're trying to get that really rich soil, that rich texture, the rich color of that soil, that deep red, but it's in the shade. Notice my brush technique here, which hopefully will be giving me a bit of a different sort of texture to the soil there. Perhaps a bit more light red, so probably a bit more light red and burnt sienna than that cadmium red. There. Right, as that is drying, I can now, let me just check and see if there's any questions. No, I can now go back up to the background and try and get in those vertical shadows where you've got these sort of side structures to the plateau there in the distance. Right, so let's stick with a smaller brush for this, and something cool blue, cobalt blue, little bit of burnt sienna, and actually there's a tiny bit of a dark line there just above that light area, and then these verticals. Just have a look at the photo, keep looking at the photo for guidance and inspiration. These vertical shapes, they have a slightly harder edge on the left-hand side than the right-hand side. So this is quite handy for me being right-handed, but with that brush, get in the hard left-hand edge. This is actually still damp for me in here. I guess it's quite humid, but now just with my fingers just easing off, just softening up that right-hand edge a bit. There we go. Right, now coming forwards, we have the greenery here. This forest floor here. Let me go back to my mop brush and get the red off. Distant trees, not very green. We've got the base red color there. We're going over that with a cool green, maybe a little bit of this Viridian green. Bit of this Viridian green. And got to try and get the right value. Leave a few little gaps where there are these clearings. Few little gaps, and then we're coming up to this ridge here. Take it all the way up to the scree slopes of the background mountain. Then a little bit lighter as we go this way because the light's just coming in there. And there's a little bit of exposed soil on that left-hand side. Right, the shadow now for this mountain, not too dark. We are going to go in with a sort of cool, it's like a cool red, really. So I'll use some of this down here. A cool red. So not too dark. We want to try and push it back. Don't go too dark with a shadow. Afterwards, I will get in some of these verticals. We can see, just beginning to see now, some darker and some lighter horizontal bands. But let's get in the shady side of this mountain first. So a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of cadmium red, a little bit of light red. I'm just mixing on the palette. I'm looking at the photo at the same time. Yeah, I think that's all right. Now, on the left-hand side, there's a hard edge there where it's silhouetted on that side, silhouetted against the sky. Now, I'm being careful not to smudge this area here with my right hand, but try and get a good point to my brush and a good edge and get a nice defined left-hand edge to that mountain. And then it goes up a little bit to a peak. A little bit of light there. There's a few little vertical lighter areas on this mountain. Now, as we come round, the shadow gets warmer. Let's add some cadmium orange into this. the shadows get, the shady side gets warmer. So we'll add a bit more detail to this when it's dry. Now, below that mountain, we've got the scree slopes that are covered in trees, but they're in the shade. So I need to go a darker version of that. So back to my Viridian green and a more intense mixture of that Viridian green, maybe with a bit of ultramarine blue, Viridian green, perhaps a tiny bit of neutral tint, just a tiny bit, just to darken it up a bit. Viridian green, ultramarine blue. This is actually in value-wise, it's darker than the shady side of this mountain. It might need to be a little bit darker than that. Bit of a thicker consistency to this paint as well. Not so much water. There's still quite a lot of water on my brush. Okay. So starting from the left-hand side, work my way up to the mountain and define these little curved sort of curved edge to the scree. So it goes curved there, another curve. There. Oh, there's a bit of shine on the on your display, but that will go when that dries. Just down here, and this area here, there's a darker shadow that's coming across the scene. There we go. All right, now over to this mountain on the right. I'll let that dry a bit before I go back to it. Over to the right-hand side then, and these mountains on the right. Now the shady side of these mountains are quite warm. It's going to be, let's go Allerton Crimson, light red, and it goes cooler. So we warm at the top and we go cooler down the bottom. Then we hit the valley floor. We go a little bit greener. We can see some of those trees appearing again. So starting from the top, and this is going to define the right-hand edge of the main butte. This goes up a little bit. And then we've got the vertical side. Now, in between these two bits, we've got these pinnacles. One there. They're quite dark, so I picked up a bit of neutral tint, a bit of ultramarine blue, and I guess they're shaded by the peaks on the right. Now, this main area on the right-hand side, light hitting the right-hand side of that one, and then down into the where the scree begins on that side. Now I need to go cooler, darker in this area here. Ultramarine blue. Use a bit of burnt sienna. Again, defining that right-hand edge of the butte. Cooler, ultramarine blue, and a little bit greener down towards the bottom. Pick up a bit of viridian green. There we go. Right, main mountain then. Got to be very careful with this one because this is the main feature of the painting, and I've got to get it right. So it's going to be a similar strategy to that one where we've got the warmer shadow, and then it goes cooler, and then we've got cool bits along, cool vertical shadows on the vertical parts below the scree. mop brush still, and this cadmium red. And over on the left hand side of this butte, it's darker and it's a cooler red. So alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. Make sure I've got a good point. Then this sort of pinnacle here has got a bit of light on the right hand side. Then over to the middle where it goes a bit darker. In the middle. And then that red on the right hand side. Again, I'll come back to these, add a bit more definition to the cracks. There we are. A little bit of greenery now on the top. There's some vegetation here, and then a shadow comes down. So get the vegetation in first, and then shadows later on. Let's mix some greens up here. Cobalt green, viridian green, a cool green. And this vegetation, there's lots of little horizontal lines, I guess, where it's sort of slightly contoured at the top there, and the vegetation sort of settles in those little troughs. If I think the edge is a bit too hard, I'll just quickly dab my finger in. All right, now coming down to these vertical shadows, I think I'll go to my smaller brush. Bit like I did over here, these vertical shadows, and hard edge on the left, soft edge on the right of these shadow shapes. Cobalt blue, cadmium red. Starting from the left-hand side. Hard edge on the left, soft edge on the right. There's not much paint on my, there's not much water on my brush at the moment. Just get in these shapes, all sorts of different angles, but generally they're vertical. And then over to the right. Gradually taking shape. I reckon we're about halfway there so far. This might be a long one. Right. Okay. So let's continue down with, I've got to get in a bit more vegetation in here, but let's just continue with these shadows down to, so ultramarine blue or cobalt blue and my cadmium red. So this is this other scree slope here. There's a little bit of a scree slope there. That's the main one, vertical scree slope. There's that, come down to that rooftop. Here we go. Now, back to these mountains here. That's a bit dry now for me. Let's just add in a bit more definition to these scree slopes coming down. And then the horizontal and vertical marks in this mountain, the darker ones first of all. And there's a bit of a crack there. And then another one there. So likewise over here on the right-hand side, some horizontals. Some of these horizontals aren't strictly horizontal. They do slope up or slope down a little bit. And vertical cracks coming down that one. It's almost dry brush marks here, not much water on the brush. With my flat brush, I want to get a stronger edge to some of those, the tree line at the top of the scree piles for the slopes there. So flat brush, I could use the flat edge of a mop brush, but something dark, Viridian green, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. There we go. Right, this one here, the main one. Again, just the darker bands here. There's a few at the top. And then some more on the the left-hand side, sorry. And just a few horizontals here. And on that right-hand one. And then darker between the two. And some darker shadow coming down from the butte down over the scree slope. There's a few little trees silhouetted against the sky on that left-hand side, and then this shadow. Yeah. Vegetation in the valley floor. So I'll stick with my medium synthetic round brush here. For these trees here, around this light area here, and these trees, well, you can hardly make out that they are trees, but they're these different shapes in the valley floor with a little bit of shadow between or underneath them. Let's just get in. These marks. Now this area of forest, it does get greener, a lighter green towards the light, towards this light area. So let's go with this dark green theme. But now, as we come into the light, pick up my spring green, pick up a lighter green, add some yellow to that viridian green. Just some blobs, basically. We'll add a bit of shadow below them in a minute, just to give them, just try and make them more sort of tree-like. And then they become a little bit sparser as they hit that area, this light area. A little bit darker up at the base of the butte. So adding a bit of shadow now, a bit of neutral tint, viridian green, neutral tint, and just a few little shadows underneath the trees, and perhaps a bit of a cast shadow going over to the left of some of those shapes. I guess there's a little bit of a slope of the land still, a little bit like that. Okay. Add in a little bit of a few little very faint horizontal lines to these vertical walls here in this red. And start from the top. Some thinner than others. a little bit of greenery in here. Just here and there, there's some vegetation. There's a little bit of vegetation along there, so a bit of spring green, a bit of cobalt green, and that's too much. Needs to be around about there. Right, just to find some of these shadow shapes a little bit more. Right, a few darker lines, dry brush, thin lines. Just define that edge a bit more. All right. Might come back to, I need to get in those lighter lines with some lighter gouache, but for now, let me turn my attention to the foreground and these darker trees. Might need to go a bit darker in there. Anyway, these darker trees. Back to my mop brush then, and a spring green, viridian green, bit of burnt umber. Actually, a bit of tiny bit of red to that. Viridian green. Bit of spring green. Trying to get that sort of dark olive green, I guess, color of those pine trees. So get in, actually I need to go a bit darker. Neutral tint, viridian green. That's a bit better. Then these shapes of these pine trees spread out. Spring green, viridian green, neutral tint. this paint's quite thick actually, so which I need to be quite thick because I've got this darker background and I want to have some of the lighter, slightly lighter foliage going over it. Right. Let's continue down to the right-hand corner. Then into this area where we've got this reddish soil, just some odd bushes here and there. We'll add a bit of shadow underneath them in a minute. So just fill in this bottom section. Right, a bit of shadow now. That'll give this a bit more form. Neutral tint, ultra blue, and try and give a feeling of the contour of the hillside here, but a little bit of shadow underneath these shapes. Neutral tint, ultra blue. There's a main tree here. Back to the valley. And those slopes going up to the butte. Okay, what's next? I think we're nearly there, making progress. I'm going to add in some of those light bands to these buttes now. I'll get a darker edge in there. Yep, there are a few subtle lighter bands, mainly horizontal. There are a few vertical lighter bands. So smaller brush, clean it up. And this is where I'm going to use a bit of this Naples lemon yellow gouache. If you haven't got that, then a bit of yellow ochre and some white paint or white gouache, that would equally suffice. So small brush, make sure it's clean, small brush and tiny bit of water. This gouache is going to go darker, so just bear that in mind. Starting with the far mountain, there is a line that goes across the middle. Now, it's not a continuous line. It sort of gets lighter, darker. There's a few subtle ones just higher up. There we are on that one. Now, coming to our main rock, there's a line almost halfway down. There, let's do another one further up. Then on the more distant one, and that right-hand piece. Now a few verticals just where these cracks are. And then maybe there's a few little horizontals there. There. Don't want to overdo this, otherwise it's going to get a little bit too fussy and overworked. But just a few to indicate those horizontals, and in this valley floor here. Let's define this house a little bit more with a bit of shadow underneath the roof. There we are. Hopefully that stands out a little bit more. There's some kind of structure in there. Right, does the foreground need a bit more? I need a bit more shadow underneath. Try and make this a bit darker. So flat brush, neutral tint, ultramarine blue, and a bit like how I did the clouds. Try and get the feeling of that hard edge and soft edge with a sort of flicking motion. Make sure I go right down into that bottom right corner. There we go. Connect with the valley floor a bit more there. I might take a bit of lavender, trying to get a bit more of a hazy light to some of these areas here. Maybe a bit of lavender also there. Flat brush then again. Make sure it's nice and dry. Sorry, nice and clean. And so I've got some lavender here. Could try this with a bit of cerulean blue and some white, tiny bit of alizarin crimson if you haven't got lavender. But if you haven't got lavender, give it a go. There's a number of the main brands do it. And just adds a bit of extra dimension to shady areas. Great for sort of summer day. Summer day shadows. Let's get a bit of lavender in there. And there. There's a bit over here as well. Not too much. Yeah. Have I finished? That's the big question. Let's just review where I've got to. So all the elements: cloud, cloudy sky, cloudier sky, background hills. Don't want to put too much detail there. Get the values right. Now coming here, the edges here, some of these are a little bit too hard. So you can soften them up with a damp brush. If you think that's a little bit too harsh, get a bit more of my horizontals in there. Yes, so soft brush, just soften out some of these lines a little bit. And a bit more shadow just on that right hand side where it meets the main butte. Right, I think I just need a bit more light on some of these trees, then I'm done. Let me go back to my flat brush and a bit of the spring green, a bit of cadmium yellow, fairly thick. Just on the right hand side, pick up some of those trees. Let me just try it on one first of all. Spring green, cadmium yellow, and just get in some bolder areas of green in that foreground. Go a bit darker there. Yeah, I think that is it, everyone. For me, I could just keep at it, but the danger is I'm going to lose any freshness I might have had. I might just later on put a few more shadows on some of those trees over there just to give them, just to try and connect them more with the ground and make them more tree-like over there, for example. Um, that group there, just, do you see what I mean? Just pick up on a few shapes, and then you get the feeling of that slope a little bit more, perhaps a few more here. There we are. That's it. Right, I'm going to let this dry. I'll take a photo of it for you, and in the morning I will make, because it's what time is it here? It's nearly 10 p.m. UK time. So I will